Good afternoon, good morning, good evening to you all, wherever you may be, and welcome to this afternoon's webinar where we're looking at how to avoid common IGA pitfalls and enable you to deploy successfully. I'm Craig Ramsay. I'm a Senior Solution Architect at Omada with over a decade of experience in the identity space. Prior to working at Omada, where I've been for the last 2.5 years, I was with RSA Security as a professional services consultant. And prior to that, worked in various financial services organisations in the UK within their identity and access management teams. Uli, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yes, Ulrich Sturmröse, Senior Vice President, Enterprise Identity Management at IC Consult, so responsible for everything which is related to identity management. I'm working in the IAM space for more than 20 years and especially for more than 11 years now for IC Consult.
Great, thanks, Uli. So IC Consult, obviously one of Omada's partners in the UK and other regions too. You're obviously in the DACH region. Really, and I'm excited to do this joint webinar today. So first and foremost, apologies, my webcam, for whatever technical reasons, doesn't seem to be working. So you're just going to have to listen to my voice and not see me, but it's no great loss. But let's cover the agenda for today. So we're going to look at the most common pitfalls of IGA deployments, as you would hope and expect by the title of the webinar, how we would recommend that you avoid them. We're going to look at some Omada and IC Consult customer examples, and then look at the Omada and IC Consult approach to deploying IGA successfully. We'll then wrap up, look at some key takeaways, and show some next steps and how you might want to then proceed with your identity journey. So I'm going to pass back over to you, Uli, to summarize why you see IAM projects fail from your experience at IC Consult.
Yeah, thank you, Greg. So there are several reasons which we put into some kind of categories. So the first is some kind of how to get the right involved parties into a project. That means especially that you have to have support by your management, by the business departments who are affected by implementing an IAM system, and especially on how their internal processes will work to get access to whatever they want to have it. Especially also budget things, like normally if you do not have enough money for the project, you will run into problems. And a special thing which we also experienced is that you need the user acceptance of the UI in which the users themselves are doing some kind of interaction with the IAM system. If they don't like the interface, they don't like to work with it. And that also leads to problems in using the IAM project. Of course, a project needs some kind of capabilities to be delivered through the project, that especially resources and the right tool. The project definition has to be right. We will see that also in a minute in some other slides, that it's very important to have the right scope defined and to have the right expectations on all participants of such a project, because if you will not meet the expectations, it might easily happen that they are not willing to support your project anymore. For the scope, it's very important that you have the right strategy on what you want to achieve with the IAM project, and that this is not overloaded and you do not try to get too much functionalities into the IAM project itself. And at least there's a very general point that there's the risk that you have a lot of things which you did not put into account correctly, or that you underestimate the complexity of all parts which have to play together in an IAM system. And that's not only technical things, it's also organizational things, and that have to play together in the right manner, because otherwise on the interfaces between these teams or machine human interfaces, you will lead into problems to have acceptance in the project. That's the main things which we will see, and we will go into some of these aspects in detail later on. So I will hand over back to Craig.
Great, thanks, Uli. And I think a lot of what you've just covered there echoes exactly into the next piece here, where I've split into the common pitfalls that we see into three main categories. So we'll go through these. Failing to prepare is one of the main things that we see, and we split that down further. And Billy, you mentioned yourself underestimating the effort needed. I think a lot of people sometimes don't fully understand what could be involved in a full IGA program, and where identity touches all parts of the organization. And not understanding that estimate can result in excessive fee. It'd be more expensive to implement due to needing to firefight rather than having it properly planned out, and you'll miss out on maximizing the ROI of the solution. And equally, by underestimating the effort, you may also underestimate, as I said, it touches every area of the business. So you need to make sure that you're involving all the right stakeholders. This identity has moved from being an operational IT project to being a key pillar in information security strategies, and I think that's across all industries. And you need to involve people from the top down to make sure there's buy-in there. So it's not just a technical problem anymore. I think the business needs to be involved too. So if you don't do that, the technical and business teams may be at odds with one another, and HR, finance, IT teams, all areas of the business have to play catch up on what you're doing. Because ultimately, HR is your source of truth. That is who your identities are. You need to make sure that you have a consistent feed of data coming from those guys, and the importance of that data being correct and engaging with those stakeholders to understand the data that they have. And data quality is one of the main things we're going to talk about too. The next piece as well is where people don't involve IAM teams in not just reorgs, but in general organizational change. So, if your organization regularly acquires, or there's divestitures, or you're constantly changing the makeup of the organization, your identity needs to be plugged in to those processes. You need to be able to understand the impact those changes have on the requirements for people's access, and to ensure that you can still do things like adhere to the concept of least privilege. So by not doing that, you may stall your deployment progress because the IAM team are not fully plugged in to understand all your business processes. And it can introduce manual and customized processes, which are inefficient, and they are barriers to scalability and efficiency. And finally, not being able to define or having ambiguous goals. You need to know where you're trying to get to. So again, if it's not aligned with your corporate goals, it's not agreed from the top down, it means that you're pulling in different directions, and you may then start to focus on nice to haves rather than the needs. And it could also result in scope creep as well. I think we've all heard the Gartner stat that around 50% of identity projects are in distress. And I think that's as a result of these things that you're seeing here, that failure to prepare initially. And Uli, you've got some additional context around a failure to prepare when it comes to quite specific use cases. So I'll hand back over to you to share some thoughts here.
Yeah, I would like to go a little bit more into detail into some of these aspects, like if you implement an IAM system independently from whether you build it on a green field or you want to replace your already existing product for some reason. We also recognize that the expected changes have not been looked onto it in a right manner, so that leads to some kind of problems. For first of all, the overlay loading functionality. That means that if you already have some kind of IAM processes in place and you are implementing a tool, whatever tool this will be, it of course changes your processes a little bit. And that leads to the fact that the existing functionalities will not exist anymore one by one after having done the IAM project. And that leads to the fact that the people have to change the way they work a little bit. As we know, nobody likes changes, so normally people are not very happy about having changes in their kind of working. And especially, we will see that also in a later slide, we want to implement standardization, and that might lead to the fact that some functionalities which were edge cases before might not exist anymore after the implementation or have to be handled in a separate manner. That leads to the fact that they are disappointed about how the system is handling these special cases. And that might also lead to pitfalls in the project because the people do not like to use the tool. The underestimated changes might be that the end user have to use another front end. So maybe they just opened a ticket before, or they had a tool which had a surface where they exactly know where to click to get access to some kind of rights. And if the tool has been changed, of course, they have to know how the new tool looks like. Even if most of the surfaces, especially for Omada, are self-explaining, so at least you just look into the web pages and you know where to click. Nevertheless, it's a kind of change, and therefore it has to be accepted by the people that they have to do it a little bit in another way. And the complexity, especially if you have complex approval workflows or SOD rules in place, may lead to the fact that the project becomes a little bit more complicated, and at least that it needs more effort to implement it, and therefore it could lead to a very long-running project. Especially you have to think about not replacing anything in one big bang, but having small steps to replace it. But if you think about having small steps to replace it, it might lead to the fact that your old tool is still running for some cases. So you have some use cases which are running in the old tool, others are in the new tool. That leads to the fact that in the transition planning, you have to think very well that the people know where they have to do something, and that they do not try to do something which is already moved to the new tool, still to click in the old tool to receive that right. And that might lead to the fact that the migration period becomes a little bit complicated or chaotically for the end user. And of course, this has to be avoided. And for this, the most important thing is, of course, communication. All these facts can lead to a lot of additional things which have to be taken into account in an IAM project, having changes or implementing things where you do not think about that you really need them, and that will additionally increase your costs, and therefore can also lead to the fact that the estimations you made in front of the project will not be met anymore, and that, of course, leads also to a big problem if you run out of money. So that's the most important things which we recognized in projects. And I will hand back to Craig to speak about possibilities to avoid these pitfalls.
Thanks, Charlie. So we've covered the failing to prepare. So I mean, now we're going to look at the poor data quality and how that may impact, or how that is a common pitfall to delivering IGA successfully. So often you see people that are fixing the symptom and not the cause, and what I mean by that is your poor data quality may result in garbage in, garbage out when it comes to the creation of users, when people are moving, when people leave. And if you spend your time putting in exception processes to try and fix that after the fact, what you should be doing is going to the root cause of that, which is the data at source. And I mean, as I said, if you try to do that, the example we've got here is a mismatch or abundance of job titles. If there's inconsistency in the job titles coming from HR, the solution isn't to put a process in that can deal with different concatenations or different combinations. In some roles it might be vice president, other it's VP, other it's vice pres. What you need is consistency in the data quality. You don't put a process in place to handle the different possibilities. You fix it at source. So that you could have that mismatch. It could result in duplicates, which is a problem. You don't want duplicate identities to exist. A single record representing a single identity or human in the organization and the access they have. You may then have things like business partner accounts that have no owners. You've got your third parties, contractors, vendors, etc. that come on, and you need to know who those people are and make sure you've got that line of vision between who they're owned and putting governance around those. And finally, you're not cleaning the data in the source systems themselves. So, not just your authority to source from an HR perspective, but, actually making sure that the data that you're importing from an account perspective, a resource assignment perspective, that's accurate and contains things like business-friendly descriptions. You've got owners for your critical resources. All of these things should be done at source rather than trying to retroactively fit solutions to the problem. I think another point as well is, not defining what can be manual. And what we mean by that is that you don't have to automate everything. Exceptions are, well, they're exceptions. They're there for that very reason. If you try to automate absolutely everything, you will lead to project delays. There are things that might still be manual. You need to look at the effort to benefit ratio and look at the existing processes. Even there might be a manual process already, but it might be very, very effective, and it might not be worth the effort to actually automate. And that's where you can end up wasting time and resources on these edge use cases that don't add value and don't allow you to recognize value and ROI quickly. And it can also lead to ambiguity on organizational preferences and needs when you start to focus on these, rather than looking at things that will focus on the 80-20 rule, or even 90% of things should be able to be handled through automation, and you'll still have those edge or exception cases. And also thinking you can do it all, you should do it all yourself. You should decentralize things where possible. So, enable others in the organization to help what you're doing. And if you try to do that, keep it all to yourself, you've got a lack of knowledge of the underlying process. Ultimately, IGA implementations are a technical translation of business process. So you need to engage with those stakeholders in the business to understand what the process is and what the input to those processes and what the actual output should be. You may then overly complicate processes by not speaking to the people that understand what that output should be. And then you've got that snowball effect of bad data on bad data. So if you start to automate and put things that are overly complicated, you're only going to exacerbate the problem through automation. So as I said, poor data quality can lead to a lot of problems in delivering IGA successfully. And then finally, the last part is the overly complicated and customized approach to delivering IGA. And what we mean by that is, if you look at role-based access control, for example, if you try to apply overly granular roles, if you end up with a role per user, it's no longer role-based access control. And what you're resulting there, if you've got overcomplications of the birthright process, you want to be able to make people productive on day one. So when people join the organization, it should be clear what they need to be productive from day one. It shouldn't contain sensitive or high-risk access, but it should allow that productivity from day one. You don't want for there to be confusion from department to department if you're not taking a consistent approach. So always start with that birthright level and then start going down through the layers in the organization when you start to look at organizational roles. And if you have these inconsistent roles that haven't got a standardized approach, the effort to maintaining those roles will be massive due to the disparate nature of the roles that you've got implemented. We've got the quote here that we are different than everyone else, and whilst it is true that every organization will have its own unique quirks, ultimately, I would argue that the vast majority of IGA use cases should be able to be aligned with best practice. So if you decide to, really try and automate and specialize and customize every single process that you have, you'll have these bespoke processes that can easily break. They're certainly not scalable. They're the point-in-time solutions that achieve what you need at that point in time, but you cannot scale that to different identity types, different target systems. And it becomes a problem, as I said, for ongoing maintenance and things like upgrades as well. And what I mean by too many features and releases here, that's not from your IGA vendor, but it's releases in the program of work that you're doing. So rather than trying to boil the ocean and do everything at once, very much take a phased or agile approach to your project delivery. You want to be delivering incremental value. So, if you're not doing that and you do try to deliver too much at once, there'll be a lack of focus on the core tasks at hand that what will give value. And you'll end up being delayed on release. It's not an agile process. You're trying to do too much. There'll be things that that cannot be achieved in that point in time. So working in that agile way to do sprints to deliver continuous value will enable you to see value and deliver an IGA program more successfully. And then finally, past success does not equal future success. Or another way to word that would be, if you always do what you've always done, you'll always get what you've always got. So, just because things have been done in a specific way, if you've got these wrong assumptions about why things are the way they are, and you're failing to capitalize on a new capability in your IGA solution, then you're not going to set yourself up for the success in the best way. And again, that kind of comes back to aligning with best practice. Just doing things in a lift and shift because it's the way it's always been done without considering changes or efficiency improvements to your processes will be another stumbling block to success. So how do you then avoid these pitfalls? Obviously, preparation is key, as we said. There needs to be a commitment to data quality in the organization, and you should take a standards-based approach to your implementation to enable that. These three themes will come out when we look at an Omada and IC Consult customer case study here just now, but it's just worth keeping those three things in mind. So if we take Guidewire, one of the Omada customers, the three key things that they found helped them was the organizational buy-in. It was secured early. It was very clear that identity was an important piece of their information security strategy, and the benefits that it could bring across the organization were clearly communicated, and there were stakeholders that were accountable and responsible across the project. They started with the basics, so they didn't try to boil the ocean. They aligned with Omada's accelerator package, which I'll come to shortly as well, but they looked for incremental value. They onboarded critical apps and implemented birthright access that improved identity lifecycle management across those applications. And finally, there was a reduction in custom processes. So they were very bought into the approach of doing things in a standards-based approach by using Identity Process Plus. Again, something I'll cover in more detail. But they were able to lower the total cost of ownership of the approach by doing this, and they were obviously able to realize those benefits quicker as well. Uli, I'll pass over to you to talk about one of the IC Consult customer case studies too.
Yeah, thank you. We did similar things with another customer who implemented IAM with Omada in a big project to change the way they were working from manual tasks to an automated system. And we did also similar things to avoid the pitfalls. One of the first things was that the management has been evolved directly at the beginning of the project. That leads to two effects. One is that the cost funding was guaranteed because the management directly recognized how important it is to have this IAM project in place. And the second thing is that by communicating from the management to all the departments involved in that project, the importance of the IAM project was aware for all participants on the customer side, and therefore it was very easy to talk to them and to say, okay, we want to think about how to optimize the processes and how to implement them into the IAM product, and that it's important is a main goal of the management itself. The second thing was that the SAP team and especially the HR department were involved into the project also at a very early stage, and they were, let's say, the basis or the fundamental container who had to deliver the identity management data, and therefore it was clear that it was very important to have them on board. That means first they have to recognize that they are now much more responsible for the data themselves, because if they are, let's say, typing a wrong name into their HR system, that wrong name will directly go through and create all accounts with the wrong name, and then we need a big change to correct this. In further times, at least the administrator who created the accounts was responsible for the data, but now it was the HR employee itself. So we early got them into the project to make them aware how important it is that they have the right data directly at the beginning. But as we do not start at the green field, the third point was also that we recognize that not all data are in a perfect stage, or especially that the data which are in the HR system may not match to the account data of the third-party systems, which should be provisioned by the IAM solution. So that has to be corrected. And of course, then first of all, you have to find out where is the error. Is it in the source data or is it in the target data? And in the second step, it has to be corrected that way that the data match to each other. So the data have been exported from each system which has been part of the project, and they had to be laid from one side to the other. And we looked into differences in the most important data like name and email addresses and so on. We defined the IDs with which the authoritative exchange could be placed between these two systems and ensured that a lot of data could be fixed directly at the beginning. The second thing is what Craig also mentioned is that you need owners for data sources, silos, or whatever. Somebody has to approve something. Therefore, you have to have these owners also in the system. Maybe if you have a manual related ticket system, the guy from the help desk who made this for the last 5 years exactly knows to whom he has to send a request to ask whether it's correct or not. If you want to have that automated in the IAM system, these data have to be implemented into the IAM system. And that's also a part where it's very important that the data in a sufficient quality level will be imported into the IAM system. So this has also been done very early in the project, and then we could directly participate in the better data quality when we connected the data sources together.
Great,
Correct.
Thanks, Uli. Cheers. So let's take that conversation a little bit further then in terms of the approach we're talking about. So I talked about taking a standards-based approach, and at Omada we have our IGA best practice framework in Identity Process Plus, which has been developed with over 20 years of experience in the identity space. Whilst this may look like a lot that you see on screen, it's relatively simple when you start to break it down. You know, if you take the fact that we focus on some key IGA areas in identity lifecycle management, access management, alignment with the business, and then identity security breaches. That's covering things like join and mover leaver, access requests and reviews, violation management, role-based access control. But what it's doing is it's putting it in a standard-based, technology-agnostic way that breaks down key use cases that you need to deliver on each of those topics. What you then have that underpins all of that is the governance, admin, and audit around that. So being able to reconcile the changes, being able to report on that, being able to have a full audit trail to do point-in-time reporting on the access trends in the organization, as well as being able to easily manage your IGA platform and processes, including things like if you do want to go down the route of password reset, orphan accounts, etc. And the beauty of this is you don't have to do all of it. You pick the parts that are the priority for your organization, and you can then implement these use cases in your IGA solution. I do encourage you all to go to the Omada Identity website after this to download this. It's, as I said, technology agnostic best practice framework that can give you guidance and food for thought when it comes to implementing an IGA program. So taking that even a step further, how do you take the conceptual standards-based approach that's in Process Plus and make it into reality? So Omada, we have our Cloud Accelerator package, and what this is, it's a fixed fee, fixed scope, 3-month or 12-week deployment of the IGA foundation. So in that first month, you will establish exactly what you have ahead. So this customer value journey is defined. We'll look at what your priorities are. We'll get that agreed with you and look at future phases. And then that leads into week 2, where we'll onboard your identities from your authoritative source, as well as then look at the governance of overview of looking at who has what in your critical systems that you've onboarded. You've then got control in that weeks 3 and 4, where you're able to then start doing access reviews, achieve compliance, being able to improve your organizational cybersecurity awareness, because you don't know what you don't know prior to that. You now have a view of the organization and who has that access. And in months 2 and 3, you start to expand those capabilities and you start to automate some of those birthright processes. So within that 12-week period, you've got your authoritative source, 2 target systems onboarded, a clear roadmap of what's ahead, and your people are enabled. So I mean, what is that impact? You've got that solution in place, so Omada Identity Cloud, a market-leading IGA solutions installed and ready, available with network connectivity and cloud authentication. Your customer value journey roadmap is established in that early phase, in that first week, where we agree upon goals for what is next, who is involved at what parts of the journey and when, so that stakeholder management is built in right at the start of that journey. Your systems are onboarded, so your authoritative source, AD or Azure, and then access from an additional business system such as ERP or whatever the focus is for your organization. As I said, governance and self-service. Your reconciliation, synchronization, fulfillment is done. Your reporting and audit is switched on, and you're able to implement access requests with multi-level approval. You've got some basic role modeling in place, so you've got the birthrights for making sure that you've got a more robust and efficient joiner process, and you can start to introduce organizational roles at that top level that we were talking about earlier as well. And finally, I think this is important to enablement. You know, IGA implementations are 20% technology and 80% process and people. So it's key that the people in the organization are enabled as well. So key resources are enabled with Omada skills and knowledge through our Omada Academy, and there's training on how to administer and scale the solution, as well as being enabled on the Omada Identity Cloud Management Portal. So that's the accelerator package and how we see it, but also it's worth noting that our partners also are enabled on delivering this as well. So Uli, I'll pass back over to you to talk about some experience of the accelerator package from an IC Consult perspective.
Yeah, so this is one of the examples where we supported Omada in executing the accelerator package at a customer. We can talk later about the possibilities, who can do this accelerator package and how it can be handled from the contract point of view, but I want to go into the technical details here, what we really did at that customer. So the accelerator package was at least delivered by Omada themselves, but we supported them in doing these things and helping them in collecting data and doing those things. And of course, by then being involved at the partner, at the customer side, we could deliver further things after the accelerator package on top of what we achieved inside this 12 weeks. First of all, the instances have been set up. This is a dev, test, and prod environment. So the staging environments normally have three levels, and that was the same for this customer. And we together connected all the systems, target and source systems, to these three platforms, which means that each of these staging platforms have different systems, like Active Directory. We have one Active Directory for dev, one for test, and one for prod, and so on. For the second part, what Craig mentioned, agreeing on goals, what we should do next to have that agile and step approach, we decided to implement the joiner, mover, leaver first for all internal employees, which makes sense because this is most of the identity data which have to be managed. But nevertheless, we came directly to the point that we had to implement more identity types, like only the internal employees, so external employees, partners, service accounts, test accounts, administrative accounts, and so on. And therefore, it was directly recognized that we will do that in further steps after the accelerator package to be able to keep these first 12 weeks slim, and therefore having some kind of access directly after the accelerator package. We also connected other authoritative sources than only the SAP HR environment. Especially here, it was the ITSM platform, because inside the ITSM platform, it was already clear what kind of accesses or entitlements or resources a user could order, and what of them should be moved to the IAM platform to be directly handled there, because then you can also automate the approval workflows and additionally the provisioning workflows, and therefore they have to be fetched out of the ITSM platform. Active Directory and Azure have been connected to the system, because that's the most important target system which has to be adapted for each IAM space, because it's basic for single sign-on and for each joiner process to be at least able to log into the network. For the business applications, it was decided to connect to ZAP PI, because that was most important application for this customer. And this ZAP PI system has been connected via the standard connector delivered by Omada. So it was very easy and handy to directly connect that system as one of the most important target systems. On the governance side, besides the normal reconciliation synchronization processes, we put focus on setting thresholds. So especially like if something is going wrong, let's say you have a big rename or you have a reorganization, it might be normal that you have hundreds of changes in one single import. But if you have hundreds of changes in an import without having any changes in the delivering system, it might be that something is going wrong. For example, the connection to the source system, which is delivering the identities, is broken, and therefore the system may think that all these identities have left the company. Of course, this has to be avoided, so you have to have some kind of threshold which avoids that if something in the synchronization process fails, it leads to additionally damages in the target systems. Therefore, the thresholds have to be set in a correct way that you can say, okay, by one hand, it's possible to stop the process if we recognize that too many changes are coming in, and that leads to the fact that it seems to be an error in the connection and not in the delivered data. And on the other hand, to be able to manage it, because if you have a reorganization, of course, then you are expecting that you have a lot of changes. So then that means that before the first synchronization process of a reorganization takes place, it has to be ensured that the threshold have been lifted up to a higher amount. Reporting and auditing was implemented, but there was nothing special. And for the access requests, Craig mentioned that you can have multiple level approaches, but for the customer, we decided to have only the one-step and two-step approval workflows and to build them that way that they could directly be used. And on the basic role modeling, we implemented calculated role assignments so that people, depending on attributes or assignments to special departments, could directly become member of roles. And these roles were also equipped with special entitlements, and therefore having a starting point for a complete role management system and being able to implement additional roles. Especially the customer then has the possibility to put their own roles into the system himself, and therefore he's not longer depending on either Omada or the service provider who's helping him to set up the system. Additionally, the resources have been trained and the knowledge has been increased by the people who are using the system, and that means also that the operational team of the customer was able to handle the system, because in the first 12 weeks he could look onto what the Omada and the ICC consultants were doing by just looking them over the shoulder.
Great, thanks, Uli. So just about to move into the wrap up, and I should have said at the top of this, if there are any questions, please do submit them in the questions tab on the GoToWebinar, and we'll take some time for questions. But let's look at some key takeaways before we do that. So, I think the key takeaways here are that you need to be prepared. So prepare by involving the right stakeholders and defining clear and tangible goals for your IGA program. That way you're setting yourself up for success. If you commit to data quality, and how you commit to that is by taking the time before commencing the IGA program to understand where data quality has to be absolutely paramount, and that is in things like your authoritative sources, your target system, looking at it at an application level rather than just looking at a whole system. So making sure that you're committed to that data quality and understanding the ramifications of that are also key. And then finally, deploy using standards. We talked about Identity Process Plus, we talked about the accelerator package, but in a broader sense, reduce customization wherever possible. Take a configuration first approach, and that will enable you to have easier maintenance and upgrades, and it removes barriers to scalability and efficiency. And as well, involve trusted IGA experts and utilize best practices that are based on experience. So I want to thank you all for your time today. You can contact us further by going to either omadaidentity.com or icconsult.com. And I do encourage you all to check out the information on the website there about Process Plus and the Cloud Accelerator package. So I will open up to any questions now, but before, I just want to say as well, thank you very much for your time this afternoon. So just looking in the questions there, there's one about the distinction between IGA as a program or a project and how we see that. And I mean, I guess if I think about that, IGA has to be seen as at least a program of work, if not a core function within the organization. It's no longer just a project that can be delivered with a clear start and end date, and then it's done. It's a continuous thing that must evolve over time to make sure that you're keeping up with the speed of change in the organization. We've seen an explosion in cloud applications over the recent years, and understanding emerging risks and threats in the identity space as well, to make sure that you're reducing the attack surface in the organization and keeping your eye out for new attack vectors as they emerge. But beyond that, there are no further questions. So I guess all that's left to say is thank you very much for your time this afternoon, and please do visit us on the websites on screen if you want to find out more. Thank you.
Thank you.